Hello and welcome to this short presentation where we are going to be discussing wealth versus income. Now, the word wealth has sometimes been misused by different people. For example, promoters of multi-level marketing schemes like to call what they're doing wealth creation. Now, I'm not going to get into an argument about whether what they're doing is wealth creation or not. Maybe it is, but let's just say that it's easy to hear that word wealth and either be turned off or associate it with hucksters or hustlers. So, the context in which we're discussing this is in terms of how do you get paid. For most people, you have to go to work to get paid. And that's the side that we are calling the income side. People who have to work to get paid. No work, no pay. It could be wages, it could be salaries, it could be self-employment income, but the underlying common theme for all those groups is no work, no pay. The wealth side refers to the side of people who get paid without working. So some of them were born into it. So from the day they were born, they were already getting paid, even before they ever had any chance to join the labor force as teenagers or as adults in their 20s. They were getting paid in their trust funds from dividends, from royalties, basically from the work of others. And why are we discussing this? Because most everybody that's born into this world understands the income side. Almost everybody expects at some point to go out into the world and make a living, be as a tradesman, as a white collar worker, as a farmer, as a self employed professional. It could be anything, but the average person expects to go out and work to make money to pay their bills. So everybody's familiar with the income side, and everything around us is also pushing us in that direction. So even when the banks are selling products to you or financial services companies, they're talking about save for your kids' college education, it's still all about income. You're sending your kids to school so that they can get certificates, so that nobody adds this other part to it, but we would say all other things being equal. When they come out, they'll get a good job that matches the credentials they have, and then they can make some money and live a good life. Or maybe sometimes the financial services companies, especially the banks, are talking to you about retirement savings. Again, it's still all about income. So you're working today and they're telling you to save so that when you retire, your savings will now be gradually converted back into income so that you don't run out of money in retirement. Everything they're doing is all about income. And when you look at income through that lens, what you see is something that comes and goes. So if your dad was very well educated, maybe he had a PhD, maybe he was a professor, maybe he wrote 1,000 peer reviewed articles in a well-respected journal, and it was well known. All those degrees and all the credentials and all the knowledge he had or she had, if it's your mom, all that knowledge worked for her. Her certificates cannot be transferred to her children. The income she made as a worker or he made as a worker cannot be transferred to the children. And to a large extent, if your parents were entitled to any pension benefits, those are also not transferable. Sometimes, it will be transferred to a spouse. Maybe the husband dies, the wife continues to get survival benefits until she dies. But it's very rare to hear of pension benefits being transferred to children. So that is one drawback of income. So somebody came, lived in this world for 70, 80 years, maybe spent a good 40 years of that window working very hard. But all the work they did, as it were, is gone. But for a very tiny few, that's not the case. Before they were born, just by virtue of the family into which they were born, a lot of wealth was already accumulated and they were born into that. And even when that baby was 1 year old, that baby already had income exceeding what many people who work for a whole year get to earn by virtue of the wealth into which that baby was born. So it's important to keep in mind that these are two different tracks, and to a large extent, these two tracks are parallel. They very hardly intersect. If you are working on the income side, everything you are doing is towards income. You go to school or you learn a trade or whatever it is you are doing, you work, you get paid. And that's the cycle. You work, you get paid, you pay your bills. Yes, you may buy houses, you may buy or invest in this or that, but to a large extent, it's all about income. And on the wealth side, what those people do there is make sure that as much as possible, without having to do the work themselves, they can extract the benefits of the work done by 99% of the population or more. So, of course, the choice is yours, but it's important to know that if you're like most people and you are doing what everybody is doing, you are working on the income side. And one major disadvantage of being on the income side these days is that things are getting rolled back. Jobs are disappearing because of automation, because of recession, because of this, because of that. And that's making it very difficult for many people who are qualified or willing to even get a job. And even those who are in self-employment are finding that it's difficult to make enough money to make ends meet. And the few who still have jobs or good jobs as of today still find out that they're contending with a downward pressure on their wages. If you look at this chart here, you see it talks about how even the most educated workers have declining wages. Now and the real thing you need to focus on is real average, real. In other words, adjusted for inflation. So you may be working and you may be getting some pay raises and you think your income is going up, but because inflation is eating into your income faster than your income is rising, you're actually falling backwards. So even for the most educated workers, for a while they were going up, but now it's starting to come down. And for those less educated, those with first degrees and below, everything is just going down. So that's one drawback of the income side. Another thing that those who work at jobs will be familiar with is this organizational chart. So lots of people at the bottom, and then as you go up the ranks, the people begin to thin out and reduce. There's only one chief executive officer who these days can make 400 times or 1,000 times what the people at the bottom are making. So you have to struggle and fight your way. Many times you have to sell your soul to go from that bottom level to the top level. But yeah, one thing that's certain is that not even all who start at this bottom level make it to the second level. Not all who are on the second level make it to the third level. And definitely not all will make it to the last two levels. So that's another drawback of the income side of the ball. And what's even more important that we should look at is how unequal wealth is compared to income. There's going to be an election very soon, both in Canada this year, in the US next year. And one word you're going to hear thrown about is going to be income inequality. And as bad as that may seem, it's even much worse when it comes to wealth inequality. So there was this briefing paper that was written by Professor Edward N. Wolf. He's a professor of economics at New York University. He wrote this paper in the mid-90s. But he was talking about how the rich get increasingly richer. And he was talking of how this happened in the 80s. Of course, it's progressively gotten worse since then. But let's just look at some of the things he mentioned. He talked about how 70% of the growth in wealth from 83 to 89 could be attributed to the appreciation of existing wealth. It's only the remaining 30% that came from personal savings. He also talked about how wealth is distributed much more unequally than income. The share of the top 1% of wealth holders in 89 was 37.7%, while the top 1% of income, they were just taking down 16% of the income. Now, the top fifth of wealth holders owned 80% of total household wealth, but the top fifth of income recipients accounted for about half of total family income. So wealth is even much more unequally distributed. Also, he talked about how the super rich, or the top half percent, actually the top half percent of 1%. So that's 0.005. They held 29% of all outstanding stock or shares owned by households, 41% of bonds, almost half the value of unincorporated businesses, and about 1/3 of non-home real estate. That's commercial real estate, large office buildings, large shopping malls, large industrial facilities. And the top 10% of households already accounted for 80% of stock shares and non-home real estate, and close to 90% of bonds, trusts, and business equity. Meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, on the income side, those who had to work for a living, the bottom 90% of families accounted for almost 2/3 of the value of owner-occupied housing, over half of life insurance cash value, and 40% of liquid assets. But check this out. Debt was probably the most evenly distributed component. The bottom 90%, these are the people who work for income, were responsible for over 70% of the indebtedness of American households. And remember, the top 10%, so this is the bottom 90% being responsible for 70% of debt. But the top 10% owned 90% of bonds. Bonds are actually assets of the rich held by them, which represent claims on the income of others. So the top 10% owned 90% of bonds. The bottom 90% owned 70% of the debt. Well, I'm sure you're getting the picture of where we're going with this. And furthermore, let's look at a paper that was published by Citigroup back in 2005, about 10 years ago. They talked about how the world is dividing into two blocks, the plutonomy and the rest. The US, UK, and Canada are the key plutonomies. These are economies powered by the wealthy. Now I'm going to just scroll down very clearly because we don't have enough time here. But they talked about how little of what they are saying would tally with conventional thinking, or what everybody thinks the truth is. Indeed, traditional thinking is likely to have issues with most of what they are saying, but they still went forward to say that, well, the world is divided into two blocks: the plutonomies, where economic growth is powered by and largely consumed by the wealthy few, and then the rest. And what are the common drivers of plutonomy? Disruptive technology-driven productivity gains, like the smartphone. You know, the smartphone in many cases has dealt a serious blow to those who make wristwatches, those who make calendars, those who make time planners, and so on and so on. It's even beginning to deal a big blow to taxi drivers. And you talk about creative financial innovation, capitalist-friendly cooperative governments that like to cut taxes for those who are already wealthy by way of dividend tax credits or dividend tax cuts, capital gains tax cuts, an international dimension of immigrants and overseas conquests, a global dimension to all this, the rule of law, that's patenting inventions so that a drug that costs $1 to make can be sold for $5,000. But this is the kicker. Often, these wealth waves involve great complexity, exploited best by the rich and educated of the time. Now, this education they are talking about is not the type you get in the university. It's the kind of education that teaches you how you can make $200 million in a year and your tax bill is zero. It's the kind of education that teaches you how you can take $1 and turn it into $1,000 over a period of 5 or 10 years. That kind of education is not being offered freely. It's all out there. You can, if you know enough, you can be able to connect all the dots. But most people don't even see it happening. They just go about their business and do the same old thing they've always done, and they just hope that everything is going to work out for them. And that's not an accident, because if you look at this paper or this article, it came from the website Who Rules America. You can Google it and you can check it out. It's run by this professor, actually a professor emeritus now, because he's been a professor for the past 50 years. So I think he's semi-retired now. Professor G. Willem Domhoff says this article was written by an investment manager who works with very wealthy clients. Most of his clients have millions, And what this fellow said, so this fellow works on Wall Street, and what he said that I want you to pay attention to is that, and he's just even focused on the top 1% and talking about how, let's see, unlike those in the lower half of the top 1%, those in the top half, and particularly top 0.1%, can often borrow for almost nothing. They can borrow sometimes for 0.5%, 0.25%, 0.75%. They can keep their profits and production overseas. They can hold personal assets in tax havens, ride out down markets and economies, and influence legislation in the US. That applies in Canada or the UK or anywhere else. They have access to the very best in accounting firms, tax and other attorneys, numerous consultants, private wealth managers, a network of other wealthy and powerful friends, lucrative business opportunities, and many other benefits. Most of those in the bottom half of the top 1% lack power and global flexibility, and they are essentially well-compensated workhorses for the top 0.5%, just like the bottom 99%. This would include the doctors, the dentists, highly paid corporate executives, and so on. In my view, the American dream of striking it rich is merely a well-marketed fantasy that keeps the bottom 99.5% hoping for better and prevents social and political instability. Now, listen to this. The odds of getting into that top 0.5% are very slim, and the door is kept firmly shut by those within it. It is not their plan to bring you into it. That thing is said that I want you to pay attention to, that a highly complex set of laws and exemptions from laws and taxes has been put in place by those in the uppermost reaches of the US financial system. Now, let me explain that. These laws are the laws that ensure that you get to pay the taxes. You get to shoulder all the risk. And the exemptions from laws and taxes means that they don't have to pay taxes. They are not bound by the same laws that bind you. So what you would think is bad is okay if they do it. It's bad if you do it. It's okay if they do it. So there's that double standard. And this allows them to protect and increase their wealth and significantly affect the US, and that applies for UK and Canada as well. They affect the political and legislative processes. They have real power and real wealth. Ordinary citizens in the bottom 99.9%, so that's almost everybody, they are largely not aware of these systems, do not understand how they work, are unlikely to participate in them, very little likelihood of entering the top 0.5%, much less the top 0.1%. Moreover, those at the very top have no incentive whatsoever for revealing or changing the rules. So when you think that you're playing by the rules, doing what your bank tells you to do or what that large financial services provider tells you to do, you belong in that bottom 99.9% who don't even know anything about these systems, don't understand how the system works, and is unlikely to participate. But the good news is that the Fractional Billionaire Project is all about giving a few people, it can't be everybody again, because what makes the system work is the fact that many don't know and many don't do what is required to make that system work for them. So the few who know and do what is required get all the benefits. They allow the other 99.9% to do the work. They take the profits. You own the risks. They own the profits. If there's any profit, it's theirs. If there's any risk, it's yours. You get to build them out. You get to do all sorts of things you cannot even begin to imagine. So, but the Fractional Billionaire Project allows you access into that world. So if you go to our YouTube channel, it's called MCWS Presentations. You will be able to see some videos there. One of the videos you would see is how to join the Fractional Billionaire Project, in case you don't know how to join. So that's the name of the channel, MCWS Presentations. And you see some videos there that you can listen to, how billionaires do it, the Fractional Billionaire Project, organized money versus unorganized money, and so on. But you will see how to join the Fractional Billionaire Project. So thanks for listening. Now the ball is in your court and the choice is yours.